Hey there, listeners. Galen here. I'm sure you've all seen the news about the United States attack on Iranian nuclear sites. It's a fast-moving situation that we're going to talk about on this podcast, and we did talk about on last week's episode as well. It also happens that I wrote an op-ed that's in the New York Times today about presidential politics, and I wanted to publish an episode in this feed elaborating on my thinking around the op-ed, and that's what today's episode is going to be. By the way, it was recorded before Saturday's attack. To give you a sense of the rest of the week, I also recently recorded an interview with Senator Lisa Murkowski that's going to be in your feeds on Tuesday. The first question I asked her was whether she thought the U.S. should bomb Iran, and she was pretty candid. She was also pretty candid about a lot of other things as well. So that's the plan for this week. In the meantime, I'll start gathering information about how Americans are reacting to the attack on Iran. In classic fashion, YouGov is one of the first pollsters out of the gate. So far, more Americans disapprove of the bombing than approve, 46% to 35%. On the question of whether it will make the U.S. safer, 25% said yes, while 44% said it would make us less safe. And 67% believed that the attack is at least somewhat likely to lead us to a broader war with Iran. So we will see what unfolds next, and we will talk about it. But for now, here's today's episode. Best Corgi dad ever. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Where's Evo?
Sorry to all the other Corgi dads out there. What?
We'll have to get Evo on the podcast sometime.
Yeah, he's been on the podcast that one time, I think, right? He's, I can bring him in if you want to. Might as well do it. Why not?
We'll see.
You're using me as a prop.
Oh, Evo!
For your audience, to build an audience. Hey, buddy.
Oh, Evo's
say hi?
such a good boy.
There you go. Are you a good boy? You want to
Okay,
say something?
Evo, what do you think about the war between Iran and Israel? Should the United States should the United States bomb Iran, Evo? Oh,
I think
that was a big lick.
He sounds very stressed about that possibility.
Yeah, that sounds like a no.
Yeah.
Hello and welcome to the GD Politics Podcast. I'm Galen Drew. If you're a New York Times reader, and I don't want to make any assumptions here, you might have seen that there was an op-ed in the paper today written by yours truly. I'm recording this episode before the op-ed was actually published, so I don't know exactly what the title is, but it's something like Why Democrats Need Their Own Donald Trump. That is admittedly a framing designed to get your attention, and I hope that it did. The broader argument is that as the debate over the direction of the Democratic Party unfolds, I think there is something to be learned from Trump's campaign experience in 2016 and beyond. Now, today I had originally planned to read the op-ed and sort of annotate it with my thinking as I went along. But as I learned, that would violate the New York Times' copyright, and they have much better lawyers than I do. So instead, my friend Nathaniel Rakich has kindly agreed to come on the podcast and talk with me about the argument that I present. So Nathaniel Rakich, welcome to the GD Politics Podcast.
Thank you, Galen. And should I say, congratulations on getting published in the paper of record, the gray lady herself.
Thank you, Nathaniel. I appreciate it. Look at us. Look at where, laid off just 3 months ago, and look at where we're at now.
I think you. I'm still slumming it down here with all the people who haven't been published in the New York Times. So,
I mean, just you wait. So, Nathaniel, more importantly, where you are is in the seat that I usually sit in, which is the question asker seat. And so are you ready for payback after all of these years of me asking you the questions? You get to ask me some questions.
I'm so ready.
And I'm scared. Honestly, I feel that you've just been waiting for this moment for 8 years or something like that.
I have a whole list of things
and they have nothing to do
you.
with the op-ed.
Right. Oh, no, exactly. Yeah.
Where were you on the night of... Okay. Also, by the way, we didn't get to many of the listener questions that you sent in on the last episode. So if we have time, if I don't filibuster too hard, we are also going to get to those questions. And by the way, if you have any questions about the op-ed, feel free to send them in, and maybe we'll get to them in a future podcast. So I want to share a little bit about the overview of the argument, and then Nathaniel, you can dive right in. So I'm going to try to do this without reading anything. Essentially, the case that I make is not about, destabilizing American institutions or breaking democratic norms. It's about the opportunity that Trump seized in 2016 and 2015, given how unpopular the Republican Party was and the strategies that everyone else in the field was taking. So right now, the Democratic Party is about as unpopular as it's ever been in the 30 years that Pew Research has been tracking this. I mean, I think that in the waning days of Biden's own deeply unpopular presidency, the Democratic Party was viewed slightly worse. But other than that, this is far and away the worst the Democratic Party has ever been viewed by the American public. It's 22 percentage points underwater. This is not new for a party in American politics. The Republican Party was in a very similar situation at the second inauguration of Barack Obama. I think it was actually net negative 26 or something like that at the time. And there were people in the Republican Party, folks like Sean Hannity, Karl Rove, Bill O'Reilly, if you remember him, who thought that the Republican Party ought to pursue comprehensive immigration reform, sort of moderate on immigration as a way to win back over a majority. Obviously, the base revolted. That never happened. But as the 2016 primary came into focus, there were basically two options for Republican voters, or two camps. There was this sort of Jeb Bush, Marco Rubio camp of maybe more centrist or moderate ideas. Jeb Bush, obviously, as establishment as they come, and Marco Rubio had been one of the people pursuing that bipartisan comprehensive immigration reform. Then you had another camp that was folks like Ted Cruz, famous Tea Partier from Texas, and folks like Scott Walker, who had really done sort of conservative battle in Wisconsin with Act 10 and union busting and tax cutting and the like. Now, sort of the problem for those two camps was that, one, for the centrist moderate folks like Bush or Rubio, the base had already rejected moderation on such an important issue like immigration. And for folks like Ted Cruz and Scott Walker, a big challenge was that some of the issues that are really core to their worldview are very unpopular with the American electorate more broadly, mainly, cuts to things like Social Security and Medicare. And one of the innovations of Donald Trump, among others, was that he sort of didn't choose between the centrist and the conservative camp. He sort of ran to the right of the party on immigration, proposing mass deportation and a border wall, and he ran to the left of the party on government spending. If you remember, funding for infrastructure, no cuts to Social Security or Medicare, and he even talked about universal health care. And on top of that, he spent a lot of time attacking the Republican Party, attacking all three of the previous Republican nominees, attacking the decision to invade Iraq. So he ended up in a place where kind of no matter where you sit on the spectrum, the political spectrum on the right side of the country, he was attacking an unpopular Republican status quo, both in a conservative fashion and in a moderate fashion. And on Election Day in 2016, he was viewed by Americans as the less extreme of the two options on the ballot. And in fact, by a significant clip, less conservative than Romney, McCain, Bush, or George H.W. Bush. And that allowed him, that position allowed him to not only distance himself from an unpopular Republican Party, but also over time change how Americans viewed him and the Republican Party, and allowed them to get voters that I think even, sort of 2013 era Sean Hannity, who was supporting comprehensive immigration reform, might have never imagined. Latino voters, for example, were nearly split in the most recent presidential election, and Republicans actually won Latino men. Okay, so how does that apply to Democrats today? Obviously, I've already said that Democrats are very unpopular. I think it's likely. The primary has already started. Let's be very clear about that. The 2028 Democratic primary. Pete Buttigieg is out here, occupying his political ideological lane on Substack. AOC is out here already doing campaign rallies around the country.
Gavin Newsom is on cable news talking about Los Angeles.
He's got his own podcast. So, the girls are running. They are running. So let's talk about it. I think in general, we imagine they might occupy moderate and progressive lanes. And my argument in this piece is that misunderstands the Democratic Party's predicament. In fact, running against the party, both from the right and the left, and attacking the party for its recent failures might be the best way not only to sort of win a primary and eventually an election, but also reset Americans' views of the party enough so that things like the Senate no longer seem sort of totally out of reach. And in particular, a filibuster-proof majority in the Senate. The fanciful ideas of abolishing the Senate or, whatever it may be are not happening. And so if the Democratic Party wants to be realistic about legislating once it gets into power and not just try to win presidential elections by eking out victories against, mediocre or poor quality Republican candidates, then the scope should be, how do we win voters who are currently written off in states that we currently imagine as not gettable? And I think you have to create sort of a break with the Democratic Party as it's been. And the way you do that is sort of attack it, break with where it stands on some different policy questions. In the piece in particular, in the Times, I say probably it looks like run to the left on healthcare, run to the right on immigration. Healthcare is one of the most important issues to Democratic voters, and the Democratic Party is far more trusted on the issue. On immigration, it is still one of the top 3 issues overall for Americans, and the Republican Party, despite very controversial moves from President Trump, is still clearly the most trusted party on immigration. There are other things you can bring up, like you run right on the debt and deficit or conservative on the debt and deficit. You run left on housing policy. And when it comes to the economy, obviously, we're going to have to wait a couple of years to see what the economic circumstances look like to understand what a winning message looks like there. I've already been talking quite a bit, Nathaniel.
What else is new, Galen?
That's my, nothing new. That's my general argument. I haven't fleshed it out entirely, but I imagine you might have some questions. Or actually, first of all, Nathaniel, am I right?
So I think that you are largely right. I think the devil will be in the details, of course. Like, it is definitely easier to write an op-ed for the New York Times saying these things than to actually kind of execute it in a Democratic primary or general election. Yeah. But what's great about our job, Galen, is that we aren't actually Democratic strategists. We don't actually have to solve this problem for the Democratic Party. We can just kind of say what the data says and let other people figure it out. So it's quite convenient. But look, I think you're absolutely right that there is a deep dissatisfaction right now on several different levels, right? Americans as a whole are dissatisfied with the direction that the country is going. I think in polls asking if the country is going on the right or the wrong track, we haven't been in net positive approval in that area since basically the aftermath of 9/11. Americans are also dissatisfied with the Democratic Party. As you mentioned, it has these kind of historically low favorability ratings. Democrats themselves are also dissatisfied with the kind of direction and caliber of leadership within their party. So, for instance, Quinnipiac polling has found that they asked recently, do you approve or disapprove of the way the Democrats in Congress are handling their job? That's specifically Democrats in Congress, but I think, generally indicative. Only 21% of voters overall approved, 70% disapproved, and even among Democrats, only 41% approved and 53% disapprove of their own party's congressional leadership. And I think you've seen this with kind of the dissatisfaction against Chuck Schumer and people like that for not fighting hard enough against Trump, at least within that's the view within the Democratic Party. So I think clearly there is this anger and anti-establishment mood out there. I think that, as you point out, Donald Trump very ably tapped into that on the Republican side back in 2015 and 2016, when there was also a lot of dissatisfaction. So, for instance, in Quinnipiac's polling, so what's notable, I think, about this is that in Quinnipiac's polling, this is the worst that Democrats have ever viewed their own party, going back to 2009, at least as far back as I could find Quinnipiac data. Republicans' low point in this metric was during the kind of like 2014-ish era, which of course was the immediate lead up to Donald Trump. And so I think that running against your own party is a good strategy, both in the primary and the general election. I think that where it does get tricky is when you start to think about what that looks like, right? So I think with Donald Trump in 2015, he was tapping into a market that a lot of establishment Republicans either didn't realize was there or were kind of in denial about. And so this was the very kind of nativist, America first, make America great again movement, right? Which is, you saw in polls at the time, right? Republican primary voters supported deporting undocumented immigrants. They opposed accepting more refugees from Syria, which was kind of a big issue at the time. They opposed free trade and free trade agreements like the TPP, which was also in the news at the time. And these were not positions that, as you mentioned, kind of the leading thought leaders of the Republican Party in like 2013, coming off the defeat of Mitt Romney, were taking. And Donald Trump was like, I'm going to kind of rush into that vacuum. On the Democratic side, I think you look at the issue of immigration specifically, right? And Democratic voters are quite liberal on immigration, and then that's not where the country is, right? So, for instance, basically, there was a kind of a battery of polling from YouGov that I found, and basically it asked them a bunch of questions about specific immigration policies. And the only kind of hawkish immigration policy that was supported by a majority of Democrats was deporting people who've been committed of violent crimes. But if you ask things that are a little more moderate, and some of the more extreme things that Trump has been doing are generally unpopular. But I think like something like deporting people who are committed of nonviolent crimes, that's something that is popular with independents, according to this YouGov poll. 43% to 33%. They say that nonviolent criminals should be deported, but Democrats are against that. 21% to 59%. So I think there is a tension there between Democratic primary voters and the general electorate. So I think basically what I'm saying is that I think that running against the Democratic Party in the abstract is a good idea in both the general and the primary. I think that taking more just generally popular positions, right, maybe to the left on healthcare, to the right on immigration, works great in a general election. But my question to you is, my first question is, how does this kind of Democratic candidate that you're picturing do that in the primary and kind of survive what is probably likely to be another race to the left like it was in 2019 and 2020?